Hi guys, it's Angie with Fun Endeavors Tie-Dye Lab. Today let's try out Dyespin's new Mindbender X. For this shirt, I'm going to do a rolled design. So I'm going to use a washable marker and make myself a line going from one shoulder of the shirt to the opposite hem of the shirt. And I'm not going to make the line straight. I'm going to make it a little bit curvy, but not heavily curvy. Then, starting at one end of the line, I'm going to begin to roll the shirt, and I'm going to try to roll it as tightly as I can. And as I'm rolling the shirt, I'm going to try to encourage the fabric on either side of this line to roll as well. If I were just doing a normal roll design, once I got the entire shirt rolled, I would fold it in half right on that line, and then I would tie it with something like some kite string. However, I'm going to try to gravity dye this design. So instead of folding the shirt in half, I'm going to just tie it with some kite string to hold all the folds or the roll in place. I did start out by initially tying a line on either side of that initial line that I rolled. But I was concerned that the shirt would come unrolled while it was being gravity dyed, so I went ahead and tied kite string around the entire design to hold the roll in place. Since this is my first gravity dye of one of these roll designs, I tried to pick a design where I had just about an equal amount of fabric on either side of the line. So that's the reason why I chose doing a diagonal line. That way, one side of the fabric is not super long and the other side is super short. There is still a difference. I mean, I do still have one side of the fabric that is longer, but it's not so much different that I don't think it'll work. Before I go ahead and apply the dye, I'm going to take a washable marker and draw a line where I rolled that line. You know, I drew the line that I rolled, but that line is on the inside. So I want to easily be able to find that line as I'm applying the dye. So for my setup, I have two sawhorses, and in between them, I've placed a piece of vinyl guttering upside down so that the flat side is what's facing me. Then, even though the shirt is still damp, I want it to be really damp because I want the dye to flow easily down the shirt. So I'm spraying it with a soda ash solution, and then I'm going to place the line that I rolled right on top of that guttering. The only color that I'm going to use is the new Mindbender Extreme, which they're calling Mindbender X. I'm going to place some of that dye right on that line, along with a little bit of additional dry soda ash. I want to make sure as I force a whole bunch of ice and water or liquid through the shirt that I don't rinse out the initial soda ash that I have in the shirt from the soda ash soak. Okay, so that doesn't look like a whole lot of dye, but let's see how it works. I'm going to use one large chunk of ice on top of this shirt, and I'm using a chunk of ice which I made in an old Cool Whip container. So I quickly found out that the ice was not going to stay on top of this shirt because of the shape. So I went ahead and got two smaller ice cubes and placed on either side, kind of underneath this big chunk of ice to hold it in place, at least for this piece of ice to go ahead and melt. After this chunk of ice melted, I did a different setup for the remaining ice that I added to the top of the shirt. I used some baskets, placed a couple of them upside down so that it would make a flat surface, and then a little bit larger basket that I could place in between the two baskets and put on top of the shirt. That way the ice would stay contained and it would stay a little bit more stable on top of the shirt. I added several different layers of ice to the top of this shirt, and the dye flowed down the shirt really well. But I started to get concerned that since the shirt is so thick and I added just a little bit of dye, that wasn't enough dye. So I went ahead and I turned the shirt over and I added some more dye on the back side, or just the other side of the shirt. Not long after I placed the dye on the shirt, I noticed I had a curious little bee checking out the shirt. It was probably attracted to the bright colors. So I went ahead and added several layers of ice to the back side or the second side of the shirt as well. And after I was content with the amount of dye that had flowed down to the edges of the shirt, I went ahead and took the shirt, placed it inside of a plastic tote that has a metal rack down in the bottom, put the lid on the tote, and then I just left it outside to process in the heat. Placing the shirt inside of the plastic tote allows it to process without it drying out because it just kind of steams inside of that plastic tote. I left it outside in the heat for about 24 hours after all the ice melted before I began rinsing it. So you can see that it looks like the dye has gone to the outer edges of the shirt really well. So I'm hoping it's well saturated on the inside. So to rinse it, I began rinsing in cold water to rinse out the soda ash. Then I untied the shirt and warmed the water up to hot and continued rinsing in hot water to rinse out the excess dye that didn't bond with the fabric. Instead of just continuing to rinse for a long time, I placed some really hot water in my utility sink, added some Blue Dawn dish soap to the water, placed the shirt inside, and allowed it to soak. When the water cooled off, I changed it out, and I continued that soaking process until my water was remaining almost clear. Then I placed the shirt along with some Dharma's Professional Textile Detergent into my washing machine and washed it using a hot water cycle. Okay, so the shirt has been washed, dried, and ironed, and let's see what this color looks like. Okay, so what do you guys think? I think this one looks really cool. I don't know that I get a really good feel for this color from this shirt, just simply because I expected the color to travel so far down the shirt. I mean, I'm getting lots of color splits, don't get me wrong. I'm getting, blues and pinks and yellows and teal type colors, lots of color splits. But I just am expecting the colors to flow so far down the shirt. I think they would be more maybe intense if I used it on a little bit different design. I think it's a cool color though. When I looked out on Dyespin's website, they say, of course, Dyespin's Mindbender A and B are very similar. B has double the amount of blue, but other than that, they're the same. They say that Mindbender Extreme or Mindbender X has a slightly different formulation and it has more yellow, which I am getting quite a bit of yellow or, hints of yellow in this shirt. When I look at my color swatch was pretty extreme. I mean, it was very bright, vibrant, lots of purples. I'm not getting quite the amount of purples in this shirt as I got in my color swatch. But I do think it's cool how I have a line of the blue and then in between, the blue areas, I have kind of like a pinky red type color. And I think that's kind of interesting. I don't know if that comes from placing the dye on both sides of the shirt or if that's just the way the dye split. But I think it's cool. I think it's a cool effect. I also really I'm getting more of a turquoisey type color on one side of the shirt, where on the other side of the shirt, I'm getting a little bit more green. And I do know that sometimes when you do these gravity dyes, part of the reason why the colors split the way they do is the distance that certain colors will travel on fabric. And so you really see that in the gravity dyes where you don't see that quite as much when you do like a tall, deep scrunch or another type design where you're getting the color splits that show up. That's the sciencey part of tie-dye that I find very fun and very interesting. As far as the design itself goes with gravity dyeing, I think it worked out really well. I don't know that you can really tell so much that it was a rolled design. I do think it's cool. I do think it's interesting. I'm going to experiment with this one a little bit more, maybe try rolling it in different places, see what my results are. But overall, I think it looks really cool. And like I said, I really like the Mindbender X. I think it's a really cool color, has lots of cool color splits. And I'm going to try this color again, maybe on a shirt that's not a gravity dye, or at least not a gravity dye that's as long as this one was. But what do you guys think? Do you like the shirt design? Do you like the color? Have you used Mindbender X? And, what were your results? How do you feel about the color? Please drop me some comments down below and let me know. And if you've enjoyed the video, I sure would appreciate it if you would like it and if you'd subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you'll hit the bell, you'll receive a notification whenever I upload a new video. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a great day.